Paul wasn't an original apostle. Now I know what God was doing. He separated him and put him in the future. So you can't say to me that they were thinking like Paul because he hung out with him, because he wasn't around. So God said, wait, he's got a message, but I'll put him in the future. So people don't confuse Romans and Galatians with what Jesus was teaching for 3 years. And then 30 years later, then Paul wrote Romans and Galatians. So God is smart. That's why I get it now. Because it's easy for me to separate him from what Jesus is teaching, which you Christians don't teach. Let's take a time machine. When Jesus was walking through the woods with his apostles, enjoying the scenery and walking around, campfire over here, campfire over there, eating together, he was always making the wine. Did they ever talk about Paul? Did they ever talk about Romans, Galatians? No, because they didn't exist. So what was the gospel? What was on their lips? What was Jesus teaching them? He was teaching them about deleting debts, make heaven on earth, and everyone being treated equal. That kingdom come, that will be done. What else could he be talking about? So when I ask Christians, what's the gospel? Why do you always pick Romans or Galatians, which I love and I read, all the time, and I'm not telling you not to read it, but why do you always go to that to understand what Christ is about? Why don't we take a time machine and really think, what was in the mind of Jesus and the apostles when they're sitting there, sitting down on the grass, talking, The first thing you Christians say, oh, he died, paid for our sins, imputed righteousness. That has its place, but that's not what Jesus was preaching. So you need to get spiritual. If you don't understand what the true gospel is, going back to Jesus, get a red letter Bible, then you don't know the gospel, then you don't have spirit, because he says, I'll give you the spirit if you'll do what I say to do. And not what Paul says. Or rightly said, not what the letter of Romans says, or the letter of Galatians or Corinthians. It's what Jesus says. It's easy to do Paul because you can avoid your responsibility to do what Jesus says. That's why you want to be churchy and Bible thumping. And that's why you get upset when I talk about Jesus never preached that stuff, or he preached, I come to announce the year of the Lord's favor, to delete debts, like Zacchaeus, a tax collector, initiated, and the first generation sold their homes and they continue doing it. Why don't you preach that? See, then you become spiritual. And that's what this awakening is, which the weak Christians that Paul called, they call it woke, like President Trump and you Christians who supported Trump. You're just immature. You think that God is in a building when he's everywhere. I'm in the house of God, greenhouse effect. You think God is in a 24-hour period, and Jesus says, remember me and rest in me. He's the reality of the Sabbath. Because the Sabbath is a person. People without the Spirit cannot discern spiritual things. This is why you Trump supporters are unwoke. So you unwoke Christians, start believing in Jesus Christ and start doing what he says, and put Paul aside and think what the apostles, get the mind of Jesus and the apostles of the first generation. Greatest one command that comes is the solution.